3, 2, 1. Welcome to the David the Dog Trainer Podcast, episode 113. Today we are being joined by Eva Tang of Canada. She owns her own dog training and boarding business up there, and we're going to talk to her. Some pretty slick-looking headphones.
I know. Damn.
Does this work?
Oh, that is so much better.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, cool. Hold on, let me just adjust.
Yeah, you're totally fine.
See,
Beautiful. Look at that.
better?
Yeah,
So
no,
much
that
better.
is like night and day.
Yeah.
All right, so can you hear us? We could hear you. Everything's
Yeah,
good? We good to
that's
go?
all
now.
good.
All right. Well,
Technical difficulties aside,
that's
I think
right.
we're good.
All right. What's good up in Canada land?
Canada land, we are surviving. We've survived, the winter. So now we're transitioning into sunlight and not sadness.
Yeah, it looks like you got some serious sun there. We just finally have been starting to get like a break in our weather over here too. So I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, we're pretty close. Like from a geography perspective,
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
you say Canada land, but I think you guys are closer than most Canadian cities
Yeah.
from Toronto.
I like it. Hell yeah. Well, I'm happy you're here to join us. This is Josh. I don't think you met him while you were up here. Josh does the podcast with us, and he is here to talk to you and ask you all the questions. Why don't you go?
I didn't know that there was a guest until last night, though. So
That's bullshit. I told you that like a week and a half ago. That's why I said we had to do earlier.
yeah, but you didn't tell me who it was.
Whatever.
It's okay, Josh. It's also a celebrity sighting for me too, so don't worry about it.
Perfect.
Yeah. Hell yeah. Well, why don't you go ahead and tell the people about what you're doing up there? We'll start with that.
Oh man, what am I doing?
Yeah, I actually want to know what you're doing too, because I feel like you got back and it's like, boom, you're doing it up there, which is pretty sweet.
It's it was pretty cool. All of it was a real kind of coincidence of sorts, retrospectively looking back at it.
Yeah.
So my full-time job is actually, funny enough, in technology.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a platform. I use a platform, and I work for a platform that basically serves individual businesses. So we moved into a new space. Well, let me backtrack a little bit. I went down to Miracle with Melly, one of my former foster dogs, who had pretty hardcore reactivity to other dogs on leash. We were able to find a solution. I came back. My partner and I moved into a much bigger space, and the product that I work for, we were branching off into other kind of verticals. And so we had a bigger space. I was like, I want to use this product to kind of like do my own thing, just to like dog food the technology.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, well, why don't I just start boarding dogs? Because I kind of have a background, at least with a number of fosters, and I have the bones decently well. So I started doing that. I call it Evatrainsdogs, do some boarding and training. And we launched it the first week of November at a pretty small scale, because it's in my own home. I have a full-time job still,
Sure.
et cetera. So we're only taking like 2 dogs at a time. And I think we've been booked solid since November, which has been really crazy, because I expected I'd get some people who just knew me, maybe former fosters or something along those lines, but I didn't really expect it to be as full out as it's been, really.
Yeah. So tell me about the product, right? So you said you wanted to kind of test the product of what you work for, like with this. So how are those two things correlated? I guess I don't really know a whole lot about that side of things.
Yeah. So essentially, Practice, which is the product, we basically build client management software for businesses of one. So if you imagine a coach, trainer, boarder, walker, it doesn't really matter, photographer, where you have a client-facing business and you're like, I need to get all the other stuff that I don't really want to do, like admin work, payments, scheduling, forms, all that kind of jazz, like a website for someone to be able to like knock on my door.
Yeah.
I don't want to do any of that, really, because I'd rather focus on the dogs, but it's all very important to do, right?
Sure.
So it basically allows you to sort of stand up a lot of that stuff really easily,
Yeah.
So that I don't have to like stitch together 7 different tools, basically. So it's sort of the boarding business and the training business basically satisfied both my ability to do my full-time job better because I got a real
Yeah.
sense of like
You really
what the
understand it.
customer
Yeah.
was going through. Yeah, and whether it would work for dog professionals in general. And it made my dog life a lot easier because I didn't have to figure out all that kind of stuff. And then it just worked out because we had the space to do it now that we moved into a bigger space.
That's awesome. And that's such a cool like parallel how you can kind of like link those two things together. And I'm sure from like the company standpoint, the company can kind of appreciate you taking it and using it and like getting a better feel for it and stuff like that. So that's really awesome. Cool. So you said you're doing like 2 dogs per kind of round up there. So what your idea initially was, you were just going to board dogs, or did you know you were going to kind of be doing some training and stuff with them? Like how did that kind of pick up?
Play out? Yeah. So I would say it's mostly boarding. And then the training stuff I'm doing just as like one-on-one sessions.
Yeah.
Like small things like, walking on leash, like really not anything super, super crazy.
Sure.
And the concept of like a board and train, I think eventually down the line I might entertain, but I, to some degree, see my fosters as a board and train, like almost like working out a program sort of to each foster.
Sure.
And I always sort of have a foster. So right now I have Dakota, who's this awesome husky that I have, and she's sort of my kind of test subject for a board and train.
Yeah, that's really cool. And the so obviously a lot of the videos and stuff you're posting on your Instagram and stuff, it looks like those are the dogs that are in for boarding. So is it kind of just like a specialized boarding where like you're working with the dogs, you're using it as an opportunity to, like you were saying, kind of test out what a board and train might look like and stuff like that?
Yeah, like I feel like every person who boards their dog with me has something that they would like to be better, And I know it's a fine line because some people are like, well, if you're paying boarding fees and training fees and like all that kind of jazz, but at my scale and at my stage, I'm like, I'm happy to just work with a lot of dogs, and just get the reps in. So a lot of these folks will come in. There's a question basically on the forum that's like, hey, is there anything that you're working on that I just can't help myself? Maybe we'll be able to get around to helping it out. And so the things that come up are like, any kind of anxiety related thing. The dog can't sit still. I've had someone say that their dog is a psycho, and I'm like, I don't think Apollo's a psycho. I think he's just a 2-year-old intact male golden retriever, and he turned out to be like one of the best assets from a socialization perspective.
Yeah,
he's incredibly great dog for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Or like nail trims. That's another one.
Yeah.
There's some nail trim things. So like things like that where I'm like, it doesn't take actually that much time to do. And it's going to make my life easier with living with this dog. So I'm going to do it anyways. And, it's just a benefit on the owner.
I think that the way you're handling and doing all that, just based on what you're telling me now and what I've seen, is like the absolute most ideal way somebody can get started in like an actual like training industry. Because I think a lot of the problems where dog trainers will go wrong, like new dog trainers will go wrong, is they jump right into like, I am offering full training services to my client. You're coming in for boarding trains, this and that. And though they may be pretty skilled and be able to help work through things, it sometimes can paint a little bit of a false perception of like, you are getting everything you're ever going to need with your dog, right? And again, not that couldn't be offered, right? But you're doing it in such a kind of low pressure way, and you're not kind of painting that false perception with the owners. It's like, we're just going to provide a really great experience for your dog, and I'm going to show you that with just some rules and boundaries in the house and with a little bit of structure and stuff like that, how they could thrive just fine with me, right? And that could give them the hope to then seek out the help, whether through you privately or through somebody else or whatever it may be, without kind of really clouding that too much. You know what I mean?
For sure.
And you get what I think everybody needs when they're first starting out, which is just hands-on experience with a lot of different dogs to just play around with stuff without that pressure of I have to provide this end product at the end, you know?
Yeah, it's basically like low stakes.
100%.
It's like it's low expectations, and then you just over deliver.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? And making it easy for yourself to do that by just setting the expectation very low, and then knowing that you have the capacity to deliver like above basically 100% of the time.
Yeah, that's such a great way to put things. That is really, really cool. So you said initially you said you were kind of looking at like potentially fosters would be coming to you and this and that, people you knew through the industry. Where are you getting a lot of your business now?
So it's all been word of mouth.
Yeah.
And it's really funny because I joke with some other sort of dog professionals locally that I know where I'm like, I feel like I've tapped into the Oodle algorithm.
Yeah.
And I say that in the best light possible, where you have, like one person said really nice things, got a pretty decent result given what they were sort of expecting.
Sure.
And then all the people around them that happen to have a similar type of dog or, similar S type of dog also start following. And then that's basically how it's happened. Just traditional word of mouth, really.
Yeah. And what has been your favorite aspect of like having the dogs there? Like, what are you really enjoying doing with them the most, would you say?
I think the socialization is a lot of fun. Like that's something that I learned. I watch all your stuff and and that kind of stuff, but going down to Miracle and seeing how you guys do it in real time and stuff, what to look for, and then just getting those reps, because historically I'd only ever have one dog at a time.
Sure.
Because I only ever had one foster at a time. And socialization was one of those things that was really like touch and go, because we didn't have the space to really do it safely. We didn't really know tools and all the rest, like in a pretty systematic way. So that's something that is pretty new in this space and in this business, really, like that kind of one-on-one socialization. That's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think the socialization aspect has always been something that really, really has piqued my attention, like throughout the years. Like when we first started getting really heavy into it, I would say it was maybe like 4 years ago, something like that, 5 years ago maybe. And that's when we really started, I would say, like breaking out of like what I would say is the norm of how a lot of places would handle or do socialization. And it just felt like it like sparked and opened up this like whole other world for me, because it's the one area I feel like you will never truly perfect necessarily as a dog trainer, because again, we're just interpreting, right? We don't actually know what the hell is going on, right?
Yep.
But it's the one place where these dogs, like when they're playing with each other, is truly when they just like let a lot of that stress go. It's the one place where they could truly just like be a dog and like be themselves. And I think that's so fascinating to watch when you see some of these dogs just like truly, truly open up. Even the ones that like maybe struggle a little bit with the training side of things or don't really have good food drive or whatever. It's like every dog has that innate desire to play, right? Or compete with each other if you break it down a little bit more doggy, obviously. And once they figure out how to do it, it's like they're learning how to dog for the first time. It's cool.
Yeah, I also find it really interesting, just like the dynamics and how it switches depending on the types of dogs that are in there. I remember watching a dog who, Linus was this little young doodle thing, and he would try to hump this older doodle thing all the time. But then I put the husky in, didn't even attempt, and it's like, and then the energy shifts a little bit, and she's like incredibly calm and confident and is like willing to play. But even like just soft changes like that in terms of dynamic, that regular people are like, they don't care and they don't see anything in there. But I find it really, really interesting. And it's also, I think, in the market, talking about just like business stuff, it's the hardest part for, I think, a lot of owners to find some way to socialize their dogs safely with new dogs. Like I feel like I get that question a lot, even with like training clients and stuff. Like, how do you do this? How do you do it safely? What do you look for? What tools do you have on hand? And also just like for the owners, like having the confidence to be able to step in when they need to and not when they don't. Like, I think a lot of that kind of stuff is hard to do. So having some sort of service where you're able to provide owners the ability to socialize their dogs with other dogs that, are at the same level, I think sets you apart, because the alternative is like, the Dogtopias of the world. And I'm not going to harm on Dogtopia, but, like the big scale kind of daycares, or daycares that, hey, you can only get in if you've trained with them, right? So there's this middle ground of like, hey, I really want my dog to have good socialization. I haven't put them through a training program yet, and I also don't want to put them in daycare. So what the heck do I do? Yeah,
there really is so few good socialization options out there. You look at the ways like people will generally socialize their dog. It's like on leash, right? Which is garbage. You have, your typical doggy daycare, which is like the 75 dogs, like all out together with like very minimal supervision or understanding, which is trash, right? You have dog parks, which in theory is a good idea, and you can sometimes get away with getting good socialization through it if it's like a really small local one and maybe there's only like one or two other people there, right? But generally speaking, is not recommended, right? Or you could set up play dates with your friends, which again is another somewhat healthy alternative. But then the downside of that is, generally speaking, if you're going to your friend's house to socialize your dog, you're also trying to socialize with your friend. And that's where 99% of bad things happen, is you do it for an hour and then you guys are tuned out, grilling in the backyard, not paying attention to the dogs, and then something pops off. And like really like the boarding kennels that offer it, or the structured daycares that are ran by training companies, or things like what you're doing and stuff like that, are really like the only places you could almost guarantee are going to be productive for the animal. And it's funny because it's like, it's not that socializing the dog is really that hard. You know what I mean? Like I always say, it's not. So people always ask me like, what do I do? Like, how do I do it? And it really isn't what do I do? It's like, what can you just not do while you're socializing your dog? And as long as you don't do those things, it'll go fine. But it's like this culture we've created, right? Especially now where it's like we take dogs everywhere and everybody ogles over them and wants to pet them and give them treats and this and that. Like that does not equal healthy dog socialization, which is the biggest thing holding people back from getting good dog socialization. Mm-hmm. It's very interesting.
Yeah. There's so many things. And I know you guys deal with this so much more at scale every single day, but there's so many things that are like in the zeitgeist of popular dog culture for whatever reason that is just not good, but somehow every person on earth has decided and understood in their brains that this is how you should handle with dogs, including myself before I really knew dogs, right? Like the hand in the face, the treats for nervous dogs. It's like, if we could just remove a bunch of stuff from the zeitgeist, it would probably make the world a lot better with dogs versus needing to add literally anything in. We could just stop doing a bunch of stuff, and I feel like the world would be better with dogs.
Yeah, it's super, super tough. I mean, like, and I catch myself sometimes because, like, on YouTube or whatever, we'll get people that'll comment things like, "Wow, how did you do that?" or "How do I do this?" or "I'm having this problem," or whatever it may be, and like, it's the same question over and over and over again, right? There's like your 5 things people will generally ask you, like, how do I do, or how do I get my dog to stop doing? And the solutions for them really are human solutions, not dog solutions. It really is as simple as like, how do I get my dog to stop trying to bite other dogs when I'm socializing them? Well, where are you socializing them? Out on the walk. It's like, well, don't let your dog meet other dogs out on the walk. And it's the resistance to some of those really, really simple changes. It's mind blowing sometimes, like how easy some of this stuff actually is, but people just aren't willing to do it. You know, or my dog bites like children when they come over the house, when they hug them when a birthday party is going on. And it's like, okay, cool. Well, how often do you have birthday parties and children coming over your house? It's like, well, once every 3 months. It's like, okay, well, don't have your dog out while you're doing that. And it's like that idea so simply will absolutely 1000% solve that problem, right? But people don't want to do it, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have to play that game of really the nuanced helping to figure out what is going to be the breakthrough for that owner of how we're going to get them to understand why this thing is actually so important for them to do. Yeah. So it's very interesting. Yeah, because it's, you talk a lot about pictures, right, for dogs and stuff. And I really think a lot of these things where it's a sticking point for owners is because of the picture that they have in their mind. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Or the literal picture that they're trying to take, the birthday party example. And they're like, well, if we put the dog away, we can't have that cute picture where the dog and the 100%. Kid are hugging over the cake. You know? No, and you're totally correct about that. Of like literally the picture that's being put out on social media of like how many TikToks do you see of exactly that? The dog sitting next to the little kid of like they grew up together and they're best friends and look at them like hanging on to them and sleeping together and all those types of things. And the eyeballs
but bulging out of its head.
Yeah. Where the dog is like stressed out of their absolute marbles, but it's like, like we have this idea of like, okay, now we have this picture in our head of that's what a good dog should be. Yep. It's very, very interesting. Do you have any particular dogs that have been with you in the last, however long it's been, that you could think of that have been like really noteworthy or have kind of challenged you a little bit or anything like that?
There was one who, it was my first time working with a breed, a Vizsla.
A Vizsla. Oh,
yeah. That was fun.
Yeah, those dogs
it was
are
like
a
a
pain
last
in the ass.
minute. Yeah, it was a last minute board. I didn't know the owner before. It was actually another dog walker.
Yeah.
Dog walker and boarder who didn't have capacity, so she was nice enough to kind of refer it to me. And that dog, and I think it's pretty common with the breed, is like an Energizer bunny on steroids.
Yep.
I had never met a dog that could physically vibrate because of its anxiety, you know? And like it physically vibrated, and then the vocal cords would vibrate as it whines. And it was incredibly, that was incredibly interesting. So yeah, Finn it was like all the things that you would do, I think, to kind of harness in a anxious dog in general, but it was just like to a different step. Like, you know, he both needed it so badly, but it was just so much harder for him to do the more common things that, you know, some dogs with anxiety might struggle with, but he like really struggled with it for a hot minute. And, but it was fun. He was like a really fun dog overall.
I love some of those hunting breeds. Like we get a ton of Vizslas in. I think there's been like a wave of a lot of people getting them lately. Or like GSPs, like German Shorthair Pointers, are very, very similar and stuff like that. Yeah. And they are just like so neurotic. I feel like when some people think of like a high energy, crazy breed, they think of your German Shepherds and your Malinois and stuff like that. But man, some of these hunting breeds like that are like those dogs, sometimes even more intensified, you know? Yeah. And yeah, it's funny, like the vibrating, like Vinny, my Malinois, is that way. Like there's times if I put him in a downstay, like around something he really wants to get to, his entire body is like shaking so intensely. It's like, I remember one time I took him to a seminar. I was in Indiana for a Gary Wilkes seminar, and Gary was using Vinny to like demonstrate something to the audience, and he's like holding treats, and Vinny's in a down, and he's just shaking beyond belief. And Gary was like joking. He's like, yeah. He's like, oh, and look, the dog's shaking. Do you think he's scared? And it's like, no, he most certainly is not scared right now at all. Yeah,
I think it's one of those things too with, I don't know, I guess like breed selection in a lot of ways and like fitting owners' lifestyles. Like what happened with that client is that they had a female of the same breed, and I guess she was super chill. You know, she was like super chill. It's kind of like one of those parents where they have a baby, and I'm going to use a human analogy for a second, and the baby sleeps through the night almost automatically, and you're like, wow. Yeah, this is not so bad.
This is easy. Yeah.
What are people talking about?
I'm a wonderful child trainer.
Yeah, I'm such a great parent. Having a baby is no big deal. Like, what are people talking about? Instead of actually looking at it and be like, wow, you were so lucky. Yeah. Like the normal experience is this, and you got this. Yeah. And then stopping it there, and then they get the second one, and they're like, oh my goodness, what did we do? And then not understanding that their first one was just actually out of breed traits. Like that was actually not normal. Yes. And what you got is now normal. And this is what you signed up for, which is a whole other thing.
We were just talking about a client we have that has German Shepherds that was very similar to that. That had one that was same deal, like just not a German Shepherd. It was a German, it was a lab in a German Shepherd's body, right? Just super, super chill, like therapy dog, went everywhere, this, that. And they got another one that is a freaking German Shepherd, like territorial, defensive, right? Like super apprehensive of people outside of the immediate family, right? And they got this dog, same deal, thinking like this dog was going to be the replacement for the other one, right? The therapy dog they could take to schools and everything. I was like, this dog will never be that. So, and the problem too is like when people run into that situation, which is so common. They get their first dog, maybe they get their second dog, and both dogs are just pretty easy. I even had that. Like Vera, like she was just a very easy dog. She's the dog you could do anything to, and you're never going to see aggression out of her. She's going to be fine. Like, it's just not a problem. And then I remember I got Vinny after, and I was just like, what in the actual fuck is this dog? Like, it's like, it just blew my mind. Like, I was like, I didn't know a dog can be so different, right? But a lot of people get in their head, like, we'll hear commonly, like, well, I trained all my other dogs before this one, and this one just doesn't get it, right? So it really can get to some people's heads sometimes of like, you know, I am like an expert dog trainer because these first couple dogs were so easy getting back to, and then they take the responsibility away from themselves when the dog is having a difficult time. And I'm not talking about your client, obviously, at all. But we'll see that so much with people.
I think I see it so much also in the kind of rescue world, because that's where I'm most familiar.
Sure.
But I've said it before, it's the people who seemingly have had like 3 to 6 dogs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like that are,
Yes.
They can be just the hardest to like, it just seems like a battle the whole time through, right? Where you're like, they feel like they've had enough dogs more than the general population.
Sure.
And so, and maybe those dogs, like you're saying, have had certain results, and then it basically closes them off, I think, oftentimes to literally doing anything different, unless it's forced upon them, right? It's like, you adopt it out, and then you get the dog that then maybe the dog snaps at the owner because it's doing something that we're like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this.
Yeah.
They do it anyways because they've done it with the other dogs. And then it happens, and then it's come to a crossroads where they're either going to be like, okay, cool, maybe that was Dunning-Kruger, and I didn't know everything that I thought I knew, and I actually didn't know a lot, and then this is the path to then learning a lot more. Or they're like, this dog's broken, please take it back.
Yeah.
Those are the two, I think, paths that people go down.
That like 6 dog number really is the one also. Or like 6 to 10, we'll hear a lot of that type of stuff out of. And same deal. A lot of times when I do get that question, like I trained all the other dogs or this one's different or something like that, you ask them, I'm like, how many dogs have you had before? Right. And they'll be like, 6, 10, this, that, 12. Right. And I'll be like, I trained that many dogs yesterday. Right. Like we're just dealing with a bigger case study. Oh, I've definitely said that before. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I've definitely said that before. Now, depending on the person I'm working with, obviously, sometimes I'll like nice it up a little bit more. Like, but there are some people we'll work with where you just have to flat out say it. It's like, listen, man, like I get it, right? I understand you do have experience with dogs, right? But the case sample size that we're dealing with is so much different, right?
Yeah.
We had somebody arguing on Instagram the other day about how like the video we had of this pit bull Thor we were working with, who was just a genetic mess of a dog, just terrified and very aggressive because he was terrified and stuff like that. And this guy was saying like something had to have happened to that dog because every pit bull in my family is happy and confident in this and that. And his family had collectively had like 10 pit bulls or something like that. Right. And I was just like, the sample size is just different. Like I understand that's the case in yours, but we've dealt with thousands of them at this point, right? Not tens of them, but we dealt with a very, very large sample size of them. And it's no different than with people. I was explaining, I was like, like you could have the kid, right, that is just really easy, or you could have the one that is just constantly questioning everything and very anxious all the time and super OCD and all that kind of stuff, right? They can just be so unbelievably different. It's insane.
Yeah, and the genetic component, I think, is one of those things that is sometimes, like I use analogies all the time when communicating with people, because I think it's helpful. A lot of sports analogies in one case, but a lot of like, human analogies, if it makes sense and can kind of deliver the point across. Because if anyone has ever been a parent or has like had little ones sort of in their life, they can, I think, get the fact that personality has a genetic component.
Yes.
Like, I have nieces and nephews, and you're like, listen, there's just no way that any of the difference between these two has more to do with nurture than it does nature, right? Because like, parents are like, I have no idea where they learned that from, and it's like it's because it's not learned. I think oftentimes, and to translate that to dogs, it's like there's a genetic component, right, to these personality traits. And sometimes it's not about training. It's just if they have it or they don't. Like Dakota, my husky foster right now, she's a husky that doesn't howl or scream, no matter how many times I've tried and how many fire trucks we've walked by. And like, because I'm like, I finally will get a dog that howls because I try every time and it never happens. And she doesn't howl. And her temperament is super soft, and, she loves people and dogs. And all of that has nothing to do with anything that I've done with her. It's literally just how she's baked and how she was baked.
For sure. The nurture nature conversation is so interesting, right? Because like, again, I'm a pretty firm believer that a lot of more serious behavioral issues you'll experience with dogs are due to genetics, but then everybody gives me the pushback of like, oh, well, they still had to have learned, right? Like, so genetics don't make a dog bite people, or genetics don't make a dog do this, or genetics don't make a dog do that, which I then kind of backpedal a little bit. I'm like, I agree with you, right? The genetics didn't make the dog do that, right? But the genetics predisposed the dog to being much more susceptible to things that might happen to them or not happen to them that will cause them to do that then, right? So the behavior is still learned behavior ultimately, right? If a dog bites people out of genetic, really intense fear, for example, right? The fear did not make the dog bite the person, but because they were so scared, it made the act of them growling at the person and making the person go away 10x more reinforcing than it would any other dog, which makes them more likely to intensify it later on, right? So it's like, yeah, we could argue both sides of the spectrum, but nonetheless, when you're dealing with that serious of genetics, the dog will just be so much more susceptible to trying things like that ultimately. And because people generally don't understand dogs, right, it will work most of the time, which will run into serious problems.
Yeah, because if you play that scenario over, like whatever scenario, that bite or whatever the case may be, and you run 100 different dogs through it, not every dog would bite.
100%.
Regardless of their background.
100%.
Right? So it's like, how do you explain that delta? And again, working in rescue, you have all I get it, the storytelling that comes with dogs. You know, you're like, this dog was in the rain, had mange, was put on a chain. That was literally my first foster. And you have all these narratives that then you try to tie to certain behaviors. But I've known dogs that have had like some brutal history with human beings. And that love human beings, like out the gate, no problem. And then the other way around, I've had fosters who, you know, no human has ever done anything wrong, and he tries to bite them all the time.
Yeah, I mean, like and again, getting back to correlating to humans, right? There are people that have been through really rough things that it will absolutely cripple them, right? Or I should say actually the other way around. People who've had really, really rough things happen to them that are able to overcome and work through those things, right? And people that have had, in the grand scheme of issues, very minor things happen to them that absolutely crumble them before, right? So again, getting back to a genetic predisposition to how you could handle stressors happening around you and how you act in the face of them. It is so freaking important. So yeah, again, there is a nurture element at play, but so much of it is just the nature of the animal.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, you know, we've talked about it too, like these bully, you know, you kind of have to say like mixes at this point because you never know what's in it. And do you remember my friend's dog, Kevin, that came in? Yeah. So
it's like a Mastiff mix or something.
Yeah. Like looks like a pretty good Mastiff, right? And they did the DNA thing, which I know is very like controversial right now. You never know
what did it say?
But it's
American Village Dog.
It was like it was like 3% was
really
was that it was like more boxer than anything, and it was like so weird because you would never know. You would look at it and be like, this is a Mastiff, like 100%, but it wasn't. But you know, you talk about genetics, it's like you never know, right? At this point, it's like a crapshoot sometimes. And, you know, especially if you're getting a rescue, you're like, who knows what could be in this dog, you know? And like you said, genetics aren't everything, but if they have these like crazy mixes, you know, where it's, you know, they have these predispositions, you never know what's going to happen.
Didn't they have Kevin since he was really young too?
Yeah.
Was he a puppy when they got him, you know?
Yeah, he was a puppy and he was...
Yeah, and this dog, talk about a mess, right? So like this was like a fairly big Mastiff mix that was so terrified of people, right? He would just like the most like high pitch, like you were killing him, scream if you would like go near him to like touch him or something, roll over on his back, try to snap at you, piss all over himself, like just so unbelievably scared of people, right? And we could say, right, like, well, something happened that triggered it, but that something could have just been somebody pet him weird one day and then moved their hand too fast away and it scared him, which put him into this frenzy about that, right? But nothing truly traumatic ever happened to the dog before, you know?
Yeah.
That was he was a tough one.
Kevin was
tough cookie. This is a dog he got in. I was on my honeymoon in Hawaii and he got in and like the staff was calling me like, what the fuck do we do with this dog? Like, It was like one of, and obviously they knew what to do, and they wound up, because he was there for like a week, like while I was gone, and they wound up like working out here, a couple little pointers here and there and stuff like that. But like he was a real tough cook. I mean, he came in, and it's just like nobody could touch him, nobody could do anything with him. You got to pick up a leash that's on him, and like he's coming down trying to like nip at it and stuff like that. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Seamus came through clutch with that dog.
Yeah,
and he got it done.
Yeah. But that's like one of those, because I know they're, Kevin's owners, and they did nothing but like everything right, know?
Yeah.
Trying to do the best for him. And like you said, it's just one thing, and it's just changed his whole route of life. But he's doing good now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things that also just triggers in my brain, like people who gravitate towards puppies.
Sure.
In the rescue world or anything else.
Yeah.
And knowing what I know now, I'm like, give me the 3.5-year-old that, has been tested through temperaments and stuff. And I'm like, because that is a much better guarantee than some rando puppy at 3 months old.
Like, I know what I'm getting.
100%.
100%.
Like 8 months or so, like 6 to 8 months is usually such a great time period to like look at a dog if you want a younger one, because it's like young enough where it's like nothing happened to the dog. The dog's fine, right? But it's old enough where you at least get a little bit of a feel for what the dog is actually going to be like. But yeah, puppies, man. And that was the other thing, like when I was like arguing with this guy, I brought up then the example of like, okay, well, military dogs, service dogs, seeing eye dogs, stuff like that. Look at the washout rate of those dogs that are all coming from the same breeding program, right? But every single one of them is so completely different, and the washout rate is so high because they need a very, very, very specific genetic makeup of that dog to be sound enough to perform those jobs.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I remember when I used to work with like the Malinois breeder, when I would go out when we were doing sport work and stuff, just seeing the litters that would come out and seeing how different every one of those puppies were, right? Like from a young age, it was so like that. I think that like at a very early time in my career, like I was so aware of how different they could be at that point. So, okay, so actually this is a question I have. So do you guys is there a lot of pit bulls in Canada?
This is a good question. we're going there. We have a BSL, like, so we have legislation
like
that
bans nationwide.
Yep.
Really interesting.
Yep. A lot of people are basically trying to petition and all the rest. So it's technically illegal. But there's a lot of dogs that are like bully mixes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And most, like, it's not enforced really, right? It's basically only enforced or someone, might get in trouble for it if something happens repeatedly, right? It's like if there's a bite and then the animal services is the whole thing, and then you do not take the precautions that are then applied to you, like, hey, this dog should be on a muzzle, this, whatever, and then it happens again, then that's a whole other issue. But most people don't care, but there is a legislative.
So is there a lot of dogs that would, like, from the outside looking in, like, look like pit bulls? Yeah,
I would say so. Yeah, it's not as common. I want to say from if you look at Toronto as a whole, you'd probably get more oodle doodles than you would pit bulls. Like, it's not. I feel like it's probably more common where you are, probably because it's not banned.
Yeah.
But. Mm-hmm. It's also, I don't know, the folks in the city, we live in smaller spaces and et cetera, et cetera. You'll see them around, but it's not like, every fourth person has some sort of a bully mix.
No, just doodles, huh?
A freaking lot of doodles.
So many doodles.
Gosh, it was like...
Yeah, we have a ton of those as well. It was really interesting when we had, so at one point a while ago, I had like 3 different kind of facilities in different cities in the greater Cleveland or Ohio area, I should say, Northeast Ohio. And each one of them, it was so interesting to see the different types of dogs that would come into them just based on just sheer geographic location. Like our Cleveland location, like where you came and visited, like that is like urban city. Like it was a lot of mixes. It was a lot of dogs like fresh out of the shelter, a lot of pit bulls, stuff like that. We had one that was a little bit further east that was in like one of the more like posh areas of Cleveland, right? A lot of like old money and stuff like that. And the designer breeds, man. And not just designer breeds like oodles and poodles. Like we would obviously get a lot of those, but like really, really just like elegant breeds you've never even heard of, right? Imported from different countries, like stuff like that. And then Columbus, I feel like there was a decent amount of pit bulls down there, but I feel like that was a lot of like, I don't even know, like weird like shepherd mixes and like hound mixes and stuff like that. It was very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we definitely do have a lot of like mixes and stuff from shelters and rescues and whatnot. So that's also pretty common. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say Toronto is probably made up of like oodles, which I always joke about, and then a bunch of mixes, and then on the edges you'll get your sort of more power breeds and stuff, but it's not as common.
Yeah. Hell yeah. How are you currently? So what are you doing to kind of continue your education and stuff? Like what stuff has been like really piqued your interest lately?
Yeah, so I'm signed up for Method Canine's shadow program.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm going with a friend who runs her own rescue in September.
Nice.
So a lot of stuff like day to day. You guys put out amazing content that I watch all the time. But from a more like formal perspective, I'm going to be doing probably at least one a year. That's the hope.
I think that's a really great idea. Like just continuing to get out and like see what other people are doing and not get too locked into like one particular thing. I think we'll see a lot of people that'll like, when you get into like shadow programs and stuff, they'll do one of a couple things. They'll either like do a shadow program with one person and then just repeatedly work with just that person, which is great, right? I always think it's a good idea to learn all of the ins and outs of like why that person is doing their stuff. But it's like getting back to like information from the source, like you're just diluting down further and further something that you understand, but don't understand as deeply as that person.
For sure.
Or what they'll do is they'll like totally trainer hop and they'll go from like, you know, this person and then do nothing but that person's stuff to like this person and do nothing but that person's stuff and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And never really have a whole lot of like independence behind like formulating your own program, you know? And I really tried to do that a lot. Like when I first got into things, I did a lot of like shadows and I did more so like phone consults and stuff with people, things like that, where I could just pick their brain on certain questions and just, you know, all right, I like this little piece over here. I like this little piece over here. And then we'll play around with this one. And you really can create your own style so fast, you know?
Yeah. And I think so much of this stuff, in my experience, at least so far, talking to trainers that like you and also trainers who've been doing this for like a long time is like how often I would hope people change their minds.
Yes.
Right. Like over the long term.
Sure.
You know, there's a popular trainer sort of in the Toronto area where I think when I came down to Cleveland, at that time we talked about it where it's like using e-collars during socialization.
Sure.
Right. And the idea of like, if a dog can maybe associate, is that correction coming from the other dog? And like, so therefore you shouldn't use e-collars in socials.
Sure.
Then now he's changed his tune around that. And I was like, and so it's kind of interesting, just like, you know, I would hope that most professionals that you can ask them like, hey, what have you changed your mind on in the last like 5 years? And they can say something significant.
Yes.
Versus like, nothing. Like I was 5 years ago is exactly who I am today, and I was right the entire time. That would probably be a flag.
I think a lot of trainers have especially trainers that have been doing things for a while, they have a really, really hard time admitting flaws, right? And what I mean by that, and getting back to the trainer hopping, I think a lot of people will trainer hop because they're going to like, this person, we'll say this trainer right here, right, does things, and the way they market themselves, the way they talk about their work and stuff like that is there is never a hiccup. My way works, right? And it works 100% of the time. And there's no need to ever experiment or change or go outside the box. So somebody will go to that person, they'll learn their method. It'll be preached to them as if there will never be a problem, right? Like the dog will never create an association because of the e-collar or this or that, even though that's not the case, right? And we kind of broke down why and all of that, right? And then it won't work for them in 100% satisfaction. And then they'll move to the next person thinking, well, maybe this person's will, right? Yeah. And I think one thing I tried to look for initially, like as I was talking to different people and stuff like that, is I don't want to like highlight the imperfections or the flaws or anything, but it's very important to realize that like we're all humans. Some of us are just like better at marketing ourselves than others. And some of us have obviously, you know, better ideas with certain things and stuff like that. But we're all, every single one of us, experiencing the same issues, right? And that's why I love like our vlog series we do and like on the podcast. Like we had an episode we did couple months ago where it was like literally we titled the episode like this dog had major issues post board and train because there's a dog that went home and like basically the people came back for their 1 week follow-up and we're just like, this is a mess, this isn't working. Right, like, and it's like we were able to talk about like, hey, this is a regular issue we deal with also, and this is how we went about combating those types of things. You know, so I think that's really cool.
I think another thing too is, you know, this is episode 113. Like we talk about a lot of trainers, a lot of different training methods, things of over time. But one that really, it didn't really like come into my mind that, oh, like everything's so different until last episode where we just were like, can we learn something off YouTube videos basically? And we took 3 people doing the same thing. They were all vastly different. You know, like they're still working on the same exact problem and issue, but they all had their own little tweaks and you know, things that they did differently. And that really like opened my mind because I was like, wow, we've been talking about dog training forever, you know, but like putting it side by side, you're like, wow, there is literally like things you can pick from everybody
100%
and be able to create your own thing, you know?
The other interesting thing about like the marketing, for example, is then, you know, when we made that video, I had a lot of different people and trainers and stuff like that, like reach out to me and be like, oh yeah, like I really like this person's method, or I really like this person's method. And I was finding myself like repeatedly saying, it's not even like the techniques that were implemented across those 3 videos, right? They were very consistent if you take out everything the person was saying, right? The things they were doing were all virtually the same thing with a couple minor tweaks here and there. But the concept is very black and white, right? It's a tale as old as time, right?
Yeah.
Like this is, you know, like we correct this thing we don't want, reward this thing we do want to shape this leash walking position we're looking for, right? But a lot of people, because the way it's being marketed is this is my method, right? Like almost like this is this new like the one where like it was like written in the title or something like that, like my super unique method of teaching leash walking or something like that. I was like, it's fine, right? What you're doing is cool. But like, it's just like a general basic method of teaching leash walking that we're all using, right? We're just talking about it in a different way. So.
Yeah, I think there's so many analogies or just parallels from the dog world to like the nutrition world, which that is actually a world where I spent a lot of time, and it's the same thing, right? You're like the things, even though they are so extreme. Let's say you have the vegans on one side and the carnivore folks on the other side, and everyone thinks everyone's the devil, and you know, et cetera, et cetera. It's like the things that work for even the both extremes and everything in the middle is oftentimes fundamentally the same reason, right? Like you're eating less calories than you burn, like all that kind of stuff in terms of weight loss, right? But that doesn't sell books, you know, like like the working on fundamentals of human physiology, it doesn't sell books. It doesn't sell books. It doesn't make movies and all that kind of stuff. So you just need some sort of secret sauce, right? Like you need to market it and package it and whatever as a secret sauce. And then you have all the people who are just looking for help and then staring at all the options. And they were like, all right, cool. Well, like this person's promising A, B, and C, and that person's promising, you know, X, Y, and Z. And that's a lot more compelling than someone who's reasonable and goes, well, it depends. You know, like it depends on your life. It depends on your goals. It depends on if you want to soak beans 45 times in a month, you know, whatever the case may be. And it's just not a very satisfying answer because like our brains are tuned to want something like really neat, right? Clear cut, super neat. This is exactly the only thing I need to do
100%. Versus
like, well, like you can just move all these things around and achieve it based on the inputs, right? So
100%. Yeah. No, so when you're forget this shadow program. Just you obviously said you're going to be kind of trying to do something once a year as far as going out and seeing new things. What types of things are you looking for?
That's a good question. I think I feel pretty competent up to certain behaviors, or not even competent, but I've just dealt with, right? So I've dealt with some fear aggression, but I haven't dealt with like, let's say like for real, you know, like we're aggression to do harm or anything along those lines. So there's like basically just certain, I would say in my brain, like certain levels that I want to be able to have skills for like when that time comes. And I actually don't even know if it'll come from a client perspective. I feel like it might actually come from a rescue perspective.
Yeah.
Because in terms of the fosters and the foster network, I would say I'm probably in the upper kind of skill level and tier, right? So you get the call when you're like, whatever, Joe Schmo has bitten someone in the face. It's an emergency move. Can you take Joe Schmo? So I'm preparing mentally for that to happen. And I want to be able to get there. So basically I'm just laddering up education and skills to match that moment.
I think that's really cool. You'll have to remind me. I have I don't think I would have sent this to you. I have this like handbook thing that I made called like the aggressive dog handbook. That was just like a 5-page little thing I made for the staff like a couple of years ago that I talked about on the podcast one time. We did like an episode like on the handbook. And then I basically just told everybody like, hey, if you want this, just like send me your email address and I'll email it to you. Because
I would love it.
A lot of that kind of stuff, like at least from the standpoint, because it's written from the frame of like not how do we like help this stuff, right? And how do we, work through these things and stuff? It's written from the standpoint of like, if you get a dog like this in your care, how do we not get bit, right? Like how do we make sure everybody stays safe and at least understand the behaviors that the dog is exhibiting well enough in order to stay safe with it? And especially when you're dealing with like rescue and stuff like that, I think a lot of that, like the management side of things is like so freaking important with those things. So I'll definitely send that to you once we get off of this. And then if anybody's listening to this and wants it, let me know.
You gotta put up like a landing page with an email.
I know. I need to get all that stuff in check. I think. It's interesting. I think so. When you came up with Melly, I was thinking about this before we got on this Zoom call. Like that could not have been a more perfect dog to come up with, I feel like, and for you to like really get kick started with learning some of the training side of things with, because it's such a great example of like a slightly more intense version of what 99% of people are really struggling with at home, right? Which is a dog that isn't inherently aggressive, right? She's not trying to like kill people or kill dogs or anything like that, right? But she's super wild, she's super out of control, and it looks from the outside looking in very, very scary to people. You know what I mean? And tack on to that just like a lot of the dogs in kind of the mid to slightly higher than mid like echelon of like reactivity, she was very responsive to corrections with things. She wound up actually truly enjoying and thriving off of the socialization and the play and stuff like that. So that was such a cool dog, I feel like, to work through some of that kind of stuff with.
Yeah, and it was just honestly so satisfying for me because she was one of those, if not the only dog, but one of the dogs where I felt like there was a hurdle that I couldn't get past with the knowledge that I had at the time when I was fostering her.
Yeah.
And to be able to just kind of circle back on it and help address it, find a solution, go down with you guys, come back. And now she's like, off leash, running around all the time. And her mom is like, honestly, I don't even remember what it was like. And she's actually opening up her home to potentially foster.
Nice.
Because Melly would make an awesome, dog sibling or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
To foster dogs. And I'm like, how crazy is that like this dog that you couldn't get any, like 20 feet, to any dog is now going to be this like anchor dog for shut down kind of foster dogs coming into your home, which that's a cool story.
Super, super cool. And a lot of it gets to, again, the deeper root of like what we try to help owners with, which is just understanding their dog. Like obviously the training is important, but like you're not going to change who that dog is. She's still a little crackhead spitfire little dog, right? Yep. But like we understand what she needs to thrive. And a part of that is providing this outlet for her, which you guys, you've sent me the videos of her like off leash and playing with other dogs and all that kind of stuff where she could like, that side of things cannot be so novel. And she has that opportunity to just like let loose sometimes. And then obviously holding her to a little higher of a standard and teaching her to reel it in a little bit sometimes. Yep. But yeah, that was so cool. I really, really enjoyed having her up and working with her and you guys. That was very cool. Hell yeah. Josh.
What's up?
I don't know. Do you have any questions or anything?
No.
What's in your little noodle?
I've been saying my little noodle pieces, I guess, but I don't know.
Josh, do you have a dog?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, a little Australian cattle dog named Bender.
Oh,
Bender.
they're usually spicy dogs. They can be.
Yeah, he's a handful, but thankfully my girlfriend pretty much trained him most of the way. I mean, she was with him all the time. So, and he's I think we were talking about godsend first dogs. That's Bender, and we've been talking about getting another one. She's like, "Oh man,
You think about getting another dog?"
Yeah.
We're finding this out first on the podcast.
But she
What
wants
kind of dog do you
another.
need to get another cattle dog?
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. She wants another cattle dog, but I'm like,
You're like, maybe we get something calmer.
yeah. Well, I'm like, we kind of lucked out with Bender. He's pretty chill. So I don't know if we should do that, but we're gonna find out.
Yeah. Testing fate is what that is.
Yes.
You should get like a small dog,
Oh yeah.
There's
a small dog.
So there's this breeder that I just started working with in the Cleveland area that breeds exclusively small dogs. I forgot exactly what I think it's like mini poodles and Cavalier King Charles and like one other breed they breed. And they have like 23 dogs in their house or something like that. And
I saw that video.
Yeah.
That was pretty hardcore.
There's just like a gazillion dogs. But like, I was just like, I walked into the yard the last session that we did, and I'm like outside, and I'm just like swarmed with all these just like little munchkin dogs. And I don't know. I feel like I could see myself with a little dog maybe.
Yeah.
I feel like Waffles was like the stepping stone to it, And he's like he's like what, like 32 pounds, 33 pounds, something like that. I could see myself with something just like even a little bit smaller than that.
Yeah.
I always wanted a dachshund. I think dachshunds are like the funnest,
Okay, so let's talk about dachshunds though. The episode that Michelle and Bridget did about small dogs,
the small dog one,
I thought was awesome.
Yeah.
Because I took care of two dachshunds. Friend has, and I think it was Michelle's statement or someone made a comment of like, not all little dogs make for good companion dogs.
That clip is actually coming out like today or tomorrow, I think.
Example dachshunds.
Yeah.
And I'm like 100% because the ones that I had, pound for pound, I am not joking. Frankie, who's this 9-pound short-haired wiener dog.
Yeah.
I just call them weenies. He had the most hardcore prey drive.
Yep.
Like we did floor pulls and stuff. He was like, "This is not a game. This is my like this squeaky toy at the end of this thing. It's dying. It's dying, and it's dying every single time."
Yep.
And pound for pound, it's the most intense prey drive I've ever seen. And if you scaled him up to like 5 times the size,
massive
it'd
problem.
Be crazy.
Massive,
it would literally be crazy. But because he's little, they're just like, boop. It's no problem. It's totally fine.
So the one dachshund I worked with, I mean, I've worked with many, but one specifically one that really got me like enjoying the breed was this dog, Toby, that I worked with maybe 7 years ago. And Toby was a mini short-haired dachshund, and he was owned by this really nice family. The husband was like the police chief of like the city he lived in and stuff, like big macho guy, And he had this tiny ass little dog. And this dog was one of the nastiest little motherfuckers I feel like I ever worked with. I remember when he got dropped off, I needed to get a slip lead over his head. So I'm like stepping on the leash with my foot so he can't like jump up and bite my hand. And I got a big loop on it. I'm going over, and his mouth, like I have a video of it somewhere. I'll have to pull up and post. His mouth opened so wide, and then he just smashed down on the leash and started thrashing it. Right, and he actually came to us. Getting back to like how serious these problems get, like his owner was playing ball with him, and he got like pissed at her over something and bit her in the finger so bad, like separated the bone, and she had to have like surgery like on her finger and stuff like that. Like, he was a little nasty guy, and it's so funny because just yesterday I saw. The owner posted like a picture of him just laying on his little heating pad at home, just chilling, living his best life.
Jeez.
Little Toby. His nickname was Toaster Strudel also. So when they picked him up from the boarding train, they brought us like 3 boxes of toaster strudels as like a thank you gift. I loved it because I love toaster strudels. They're one of the greatest breakfast snacks ever. But that dog in particular, I remember by the end of the program, he was just such a little funny guy. You know, it's like his behavior was we'd like suppressed it enough where it's like he had a little attitude still there sometimes, but he was just kind of like a fun, really funny guy, and everything he did I thought was hilarious. I was like, I could own this dog for sure.
Yeah, they're like intense, fun, you know, but if you can channel it, if there's so much, because they're so motivated, right? Yeah. Like, it's like they can be really, really great dogs. But I feel like oftentimes people don't ever think about that when they get them. They're like, oh, they're just like cute in a jacket because they look like a hot dog.
Yep.
Right? It's like as far as I feel like people get to. And you're like, wow. There's a story with Frankie where a friend of this client had a bunny. And then wanted to, like, Frankie as a puppy met this bunny. No problems.
Sure.
Totally fine. At a year and a half, another friend who happened to also have a bunny was like, I want the bunny and the dog to meet. And the client was like, I don't actually know this is a good idea because, like, didn't they, like, hunt bunnies or something? They did it anyways, holding the dogs. The bunny is sitting there thumping its leg the whole time because that's what they do when there's predators around. And Frankie is sitting there drooling, like literally just drooling over this bunny at a year and a half. And I'm like, I think that those should be the moments where they're like, you know, this is not some flu lapdog. Like, this is a predator, you know? But that's not the message that people take away.
And with any of these dogs, man, I remember the first time one of my dogs like really caught something. It was really late at night, and I let the dogs outside into the yard to go to the bathroom, and all of a sudden I heard this like ruckus out there. I'm like, what the hell? So I go outside, I'm on the deck, and they come running back up, and Vinny, my Malinois, jumps onto the deck and has this giant bunny, right, like in his mouth, holding it and getting back to like vibrate. Like his whole body was shaking, like finally caught and killed this thing. And Vinny really listens to me well, I would say, especially out of a lot of my dogs. Like, he's a Malinois. He wants to listen. He wants to do everything with 120%. And I was like, Vinny, you need to let this thing go right now. And he was like, go fuck yourself, Dad. I'm not letting this bunny go. He took it. He sprinted into my house with it, ran all the way into the bedroom and laid on the dog bed. And he had this thing. And he literally consumed the head off of it and the back leg off of it before I got all the way into the bedroom to get him. And still at that point, I could hardly get him to let that thing go for me, and finally did. And I see that all the time with golden retrievers and labs and stuff like that, where they just kill and consume animals. And I tell everybody, I was like, this is what your dog is designed to do, right? Everybody's so surprised the first time they see that, you know, and that's why they think it's cute when the dog is chasing the squirrels in the backyard or chasing the birds, you know, across the field or anything like that. I was like, you realize your dog right now, while they're doing that, wants to absolutely mutilate and consume that thing.
Yeah.
It's insane.
It's not funny.
It's funnier when it happens like in the city, though, like for the first time in like a public park. And then you have a whole scene of like, you know, but I know someone where this happened where, they chased and caught a squirrel in an incredibly popular park.
Yep.
Dead squirrel, screaming. Everyone with their picnics is looking at them now. Yeah. Like it's a whole scene. It can be a whole scene.
Yeah. I worked with another dog one time. It was this one of those XL bullies, you know, those like real thick ones.
Like real jacked.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I can't remember what the dog's name was, but this dog killed a raccoon one time while it was on a leash. Right, this dog was on. It was, I think, it was a fairly long leash, but she's walking. And it's kind of late at night, and all of a sudden, she just gets like pulled over to the side, and this dog just snatched up and just killed a raccoon like that, like it was nothing. It's like,
that's pretty hardcore because raccoons are animals, are spicy dudes.
Oh yeah. So
spicy.
I was wondering too. Does Toronto have a lot of? Because I've never been there. So, do you guys have a lot of green space, like parks, or do you guys have to rely a lot on dog parks, actually?
It's a good question. We definitely don't have as much green space as Cleveland. So I would say it's essentially like a slightly less dense version of New York. Maybe like 50% density, maybe a little bit more than that. But so there are parks. Yeah, there are some parks, but there's so many people that the biggest parks are almost notorious for the off leash, no recall type of situations. And I actually just live right by one of the bigger popular parks, but I never take the dogs there. Almost never. I actually go to a smaller park that is less well known right beside me because of the people and dogs that typically show up there. There's, the unofficial dog parks where it's literally not fenced, but it's like sort of at the bottom of a thing. And then people like let their dogs loose. And then if there's ever any fresh snow, for some reason, that's like the moment that people believe that their dogs that don't have any recall will somehow develop recall and therefore run around in fresh snow. Yeah. So if you go to that park, the really popular park on a fresh snow day, you're almost 100% going to get rushed by dogs.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Did you have anything else?
I guess the one
yeah, go ahead.
I just have a comment.
No, keep it going, Josh. Go right for it.
No, I think a good comment is from the beginning, when you were talking about how you're kind of learning without having like the pressure of teaching a dog. Like, you're boarding these dogs and you're kind of, hey, what's the issue? Maybe we can work on it while we're doing it. And I think that is so good for someone really trying to learn and keep the pressure off of you. Because I think he said it as well as a lot of new trainers, they just kind of get into it and they're like, all right, I'm taking in clients. Here we go.
They're Superman now.
Yeah. And the pressure gets so great. And then, you're new, you're going to make a mistake. And now they're like, well, we paid you, blah, 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 and our dog still stinks, and that's such you might just hang it up there. Like if you're really an ego person like me, I'd be like, oh, I would just be done. But I think it's so good for you to be doing that in a way that you can help people, but it's not like you said, like, the bar's here, but we're going to over deliver. Like, hey, look what we were able to do in this boarding session, Mm-hmm. And I think, doing that, or like he's said in the past, like go work with the trainer, or like what you're doing, go shadow somebody, like go learn these things before you really become your own entity, like.
Sure.
And I just wanted to say that was my comment. I thought that was such a great idea, and how you're doing it and how you've been doing it and how you're continuing to do it is a great thing. And I think because there's a lot of new trainers that do listen to this podcast, and I think if there's anything to take away today, I think that's a good thing to maybe integrate yourself.
Let's just take your time with things. Like there's no reason to rush full bore into something, right? There's so much to be learned by just getting dogs into your care and being able to fine tune and play around with your methods and try new things. And, you don't necessarily have to work for somebody else to do that. You could obviously do something like what you're doing. And then as you're doing that, developing good relationships with people who have been doing it for a while that you trust, that you could bounce questions off of. Like I remember like some of my mentors when I first got into things, if I had a difficult dog, I knew I could call him up and ask him some questions and be like, hey, how would you handle this situation? Is there something that I did wrong? How do I break through to this owner, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And just the framework you've created, I feel like is setting yourself up for some like real serious success in this industry.
Yeah, I appreciate it from both of you. I've definitely texted you, David, where I'm like, all right, here's what's happening. Here's my general approach. Am I missing anything? Where I'm like, I think I got it, but like just to double check, it's been incredibly helpful. And I think, Josh, what you're saying too, like, I feel like I learned also a lot of things like by doing this stuff for free, like in rescue, right? Like by just fostering, like you get a pretty good variety of dogs if you're willing to also say yes to certain types of dogs. And I think that gives you also like a low risk, in terms of like clients and expectations and all the rest.
Big time.
Way to just, get a handle on a bunch of dogs and learn, because there's things that you can read and listen to on the internet, but it is totally different when a dog is growling in your face for the first time. I was like, yeah. And until you're able to practice that a bunch of times, like, you don't want the first time that happens to be with a client dog. Yeah. Like that's just probably gonna not go well.
Yeah.
100%.
The only other person I can think of that His is a little more funny though. Our boy at Revolutionary.
Oh yeah.
What's his name? I'm so bad with names.
Chris.
Yeah. Like he had like a gym and then it kind of fell through there. He didn't know what he was doing, but he had a dog and he had been training it.
And mind you, he had a very successful gym. Like it didn't fall through. Like he sold it.
Yeah, sorry.
Like made a bunch of money.
He sold it. Yeah, I downplayed that a lot, but he was just bring his dog to Home Depot, and this guy was like, "Will you trade my dog?"
That was hilarious.
And he's like, "I don't even."
He's like, I don't even know. I'm not even a dog.
Yeah. So he's like, I guess for like a bag of dog food, Yeah,
he's got a bag of dog food and $50, and he's like, I'll train your dog.
It's a pretty good deal.
Yeah. So
pretty good deal.
And like that's what started him on his whole career in dog training. Like he wasn't even looking for it, but like it was just like a bag of dog food and $50. Yeah. So,
but that's also low stakes, right?
Yeah.
Like,
big time.
What do you expect with $50 in a bag of dog food?
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
Versus being like, I'm going to take $4,000 from you, in a board and trade. That is a different level.
Yes, and that's where you start getting into kind of the questionable stuff about like newer trainers is when they jump too quickly into that without the guidance that they properly need for it, right? Mm-hmm. And the other thing that's I guess a little similar about Chris's situation and Chris runs a very like large scale thriving dog training business right now. Like he's done unbelievable, but he had the background in business ownership and just like understanding how some of like that side of things works. And in your standpoint, like you obviously are very fluent in kind of the corporate-y side of things and the understanding of the customer relations and all of that, where those are other things I think that crumble new dog trainers is when they realize like how much more there is to it other than just training, right? And a lot of people will either, right, like jump into all those things and do them all wrong, right? Or just stress themselves out too much with it because they're spending so much time on it. Or two, they'll just ignore that side of things and then just do things in very like sketchy, not good, very like high stakes, high liability ways,
Yep. There's like, I think for sure that background, like my background is in marketing and product. And so that part was easy, you know, like in terms of the general branding and whatever, getting clients, that kind of stuff, pretty straightforward. And then, the business side of things also, like insurance, tools, like all that kind of stuff was also pretty simple, right? Not just because I work at Practice, like the company that I use. But I forget how most people don't have that background. And even when they start off just taking whatever, Google Forms, let's just do it. They're like, oh, insurance is maybe a thing I need, but maybe I'll just get it later. And then until you come to a moment where you're like, oh man, right, I really should have, gotten insurance and stuff. Sometimes those are lessons that you can only learn like in retrospect and
the hard way.
100%.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Well, you got anything else you want to add?
No, I just want to say thanks for, all the content that you guys produce. It's as someone who's like newer to the industry and all the rest, it's incredibly helpful and incredibly valuable.
Appreciate it. We're trying to do what we can. And like I said, you're really crushing it out there. Why don't you go ahead and tell everybody, obviously, if we got any Canadian listeners that need some boarding services, where they could find you.
Yeah. So I'm in Toronto. The website is Evatrainsdogs.com. It's relatively straightforward. I'm very boring with my branding and marketing. We do really, really small scale boarding and some one-on-one training. So if you're, have a dog with certain behavioral issues, I'm totally cool to board them. If they've been kicked out of daycares, I'm also totally cool to board them.
I love it. Awesome. Well, we'll keep you posted when all this comes out. It'll be out next Monday probably. We'll kind of go from there. Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Yep.
We'll see you.